It happens often that I give talks on subjects that I need to convince people to be interested in. I'll give a talk on feedback loops, for example. Feedback loops are very important. The fundamental organizing, productive structure of our lives, but no one cares about them. And so I give talks, and I need to spend a lot of time convincing people, compelling people, dragging people into an interest in the subject. But that is not the case this week, is it? So this week we're talking about relationships, and that's something that people are interested in. If we look at the sorts of things that we think about, talk about, read about, a lot of it is personal relationships. And over the next few weeks, I'd like to give a few perspectives on the subject that are informed by my training, my background, and perhaps you won't be surprised, my relationships. Because I have relationships. Some of you may not know that. But I also have relationships with people. And those relationships are a source of learning, challenge, joy for me also. Peace Pilgrim uses a certain format, a way of describing people, which I think is quite helpful. She talks about the self-centered nature and the God-centered nature. And it might seem surprising that I, having been trained in Buddhism and in Zen Buddhism in particular, would find this pedagogy, this taxonomy of the human spirit compelling, that I would like it, that I think it's very helpful. Because, first of all, it talks about God, which a lot of people nowadays aren't comfortable talking about. But the way she talks about it, it works just fine. She talks about God in a way that is, as far as I can tell, just the right way to talk about God. About something beyond our understanding. And it also might seem strange that I'd be interested in it since it's a dualistic way of looking at things. So it's a God-centered nature versus a self-centered nature. Therefore, each person has two natures. And a lot of people aren't that excited about looking at things in such a dualistic way. But I am not one of these hypocritical, what would you call them? Advaitikas or something? I don't know exactly the term, but someone who follows non-dualism because it's better than other systems. It doesn't make sense to say that. So there's something very useful about a dualistic way of looking at things. And I'd like to consider ourselves and each other, and in particular each other, as consisting of these two natures, the God-centered nature, the self-centered nature. And consider that as we engage in our relationships with each other. So, if that's the case, then one way to look at it, which Peace Pilgrim talks about, is that you want to enable the other person to allow their God-centered nature to take over. That's your job in a relationship. You're in a relationship with someone, you're trying to help them to allow their God-centered nature to take over. This is one way of looking at the situation. A very useful way, I think. Because if you look at it in that way, then you come to the quick logical conclusion that judging others isn't useful. Judging others doesn't work. Why? Because if you judge them, then their motivation for change comes from the self-centered nature. They don't want to get judged. They don't want to be hurt by you. If you judge someone and say you're stupid and wrong and incompetent and you lie and cheat and steal, and if you would just be different, then everything would be better. If we approach someone in that way, then they might change. They might at least act like they've changed. But even if they do, it's coming from a self-centered place. It's coming from a concern that I'll be judged if I don't change in this way. This person has power over me, and so I have to make this change in order to keep what I want from them. If we don't judge them, then as she puts it, you give them the chance to judge themselves. If you judge someone else, then you steal from them the chance to judge themselves. But if you let them judge themselves without the need to protect themselves from you, then it's much more likely that that God-centered nature will realize, oh, I don't want to act this way. I'd prefer to act this other way. And so I will. And in that way, true transformation can happen. So if there is an I versus you sentiment, then it's very hard for a person to change from the God-centered nature. And this is a very helpful way to look at it and has made a big difference to me in my life as I interact with people. But I would like to look at it from another perspective. Look at the same thing from a different perspective. And that is, what if their God-centered nature already took over? It's a different perspective. It's a radical perspective. So here this person is, and they're doing this thing that I don't like. And if they would just stop, the whole world would be better. But wait, what if that's not true? What if their God-centered nature already took over? And they're doing this from a selfless place? What if? It's possible. The way I look at it, I consider with a certain amount of consternation, honestly, the possibility, it should be excitement, but it isn't always excitement, sometimes it's concern, the possibility that each person I meet is this great being called Avalokiteshvara, who's a kind of a saint in the Buddhist tradition, a mythical superhuman figure of infinite compassion, who takes on all different forms in order to be of service in the world. And I have to consider that each person might be this being, Avalokiteshvara, who I think for us we can consider to be female. He's usually considered to be male, but once he went to China, the Chinese, like the Europeans, think of compassion as being a primarily female characteristic. So he changed to a she in China, and I'll just keep her as a she for now. So I consider each person could be Guanyin, could be Avalokiteshvara. And if she were in fact such and such a person, she would have absolutely no difficulty hiding her deep enlightenment from little old me. If she didn't want me to know that she was her, I wouldn't be able to figure it out. She's much wiser than I am. She would have no difficulty preventing me from figuring that out if that was her goal. So I might deeply believe that so-and-so is deluded, simply because Avalokiteshvara is presenting herself to me as a deluded person with such brilliant acting that there's no way for me to figure it out. So I have to consider that, because I know that she might be coming, here I am, I'm trying to teach this tradition. She might just be showing up at any time to test me, to find out how I do when faced with someone who appears to be deluded. Right? She knows exactly the kind of person who I would think would be deluded. She's very smart. Not like me. She knows exactly what's going on, so she could come and present exactly what she wanted to see what I would do, to give me the chance to either pass or fail her compassionate test. So I have to consider the possibility that each person I meet could be her, and let's be clear on this, she has enormous supernatural powers. She can actually present herself in more than one body at the same time. In fact, it's said that she can present herself in thousands of bodies all at the same time. So as far as I know, everyone I meet, every single person I ever meet, even if they're all together like you are now, could all be Avalokiteshvara, just sitting there listening to see how I do. Even though she's already totally, completely, fully enlightened. And she's just acting deluded for my benefit. It's possible, isn't it? You can't say it's impossible. It's possible, it's conceivable, could be, who knows? And when we look at things in that way, a lot changes. Because then we see that their God-centered nature already we don't know, but perhaps took over, and is just using the self-centered nature as a tool, as a teaching tool, as a supportive device. This approach tends to shift the way we look at each other, if only because it helps us to acknowledge the possibility that something else is going on than what we are currently perceiving. It's very common, we hear about it all the time, that we're in a relationship with someone and we wish that they would just be a little different. If you would just be a little different, I would just be a little happier. So why don't you just make that change? And then we'd both be better off, wouldn't we? That's very common. And there can come a point when we move from being kind of annoyed at somebody for being the way they are, sort of irritated at them. We wish they wouldn't be like that, to being angry with them. We're not irritated anymore. Now we're actually mad. It's actually unacceptable that you're this way. That you're this way means that this relationship might not work out. If you would be somewhat different, then it would work out, but you're not. And that's really bad, which is to say that you're bad. This can come up. I know that it can feel comfortable to come to a nice evening like this and pretend that these things don't come up and enter a peaceful place, but in order to come to a peaceful place, we have to face the fact that sometimes things aren't so peaceful. Otherwise, the peace we have is based on avoiding conflict rather than transcending it, rather than resolving it. And that's not a reliable kind of peace. That's just numbness. So we acknowledge that sometimes we get into that place where we realize the issue here is that the relationship may end. So we move from irritation to anger. That can happen. We're really mad, frustrated, to the point of thinking that this may just be it. But then there's a further stage. This is what I call the 3 stages of a bad relationship. So stage 1 is irritation, stage 2 is anger, but then there's a final stage, which is the worst of all the stages. And that's when you're not angry anymore. You just accept, you're just like this. That's it. You can't change. It's just how you are. When we've actually lost respect for the person. And it feels better to us usually. It's usually quite relieving. The anger burns us up. It's painful. We don't like being angry. But once we realize that they just are bad, they actually can't change. This is their limit. They can't improve beyond this. If they could, then that would be great. But they can't. That's just how they are. And we give up on them. At that point, we've lost respect for them. And in fact, even if we keep talking to them, the relationship has ended. It's a sad moment, even though it can often feel relieving. If, through this process, we attempt to recall that perhaps they're just acting that way for our benefit. Maybe they're just pretending to be this way. Then it's much more difficult to come to that same certainty regarding their incompetence, regarding their social, emotional, relational incompetence. That maybe something else is going on. Okay, so what is it? What's going on then? I don't know how I'm going to present this. I'm going to do my best. Maybe in the coming weeks I'm going to be able to get this across. But maybe you all see things the way I see it already. I haven't talked to people about this, so maybe you already look at things this way. But have you noticed that delusion is an important part of relationships? Not really? Not too many people are nodding. Did you notice or not? No? Some people yes, some people no? Okay. I noticed it. Delusion is an important part of relationships. Basically, you convince yourself that someone's similar to but different from the person who they are. And because you believe it, you look at them in that way, so they start acting that way. And they do the same with you. They see you slightly differently, more like who they wish you were, and you receive positive feedback and affirmation for acting that way, so you do act that way, so they see you that way more. And the two of you create this intricate web, kind of like what is it in fabric? The woof and the weave? Warp? The warp and weft? Woof? What is it? Weft? You know, in fabric. They go together this way. And then once they're woven together in that way, they stick. They're there. It's hard to get them apart. If you want to get them apart, you might have to tear the fabric. Yes? Because it's there now. You got it there. And they hold each other stable. And that can happen in these relationships. I see you this way. You see me that way. And we will attempt to maintain that equilibrium, whether we like it or not. And that holding into a way of looking at each other is what I'm calling delusion. And often what happens when a relationship is ending, when we get to the point when we just don't know if this is going to work anymore. What we're really losing at that point is the person who we thought they were. That's really what we're losing at that moment. We're not losing them because they're there. They've always been there. But we're losing the person we thought they were, the person we expected them to be, the person we made them be. At the same time, we're losing the person who they made us be, you could say. And this is, again, I started talking about feedback loops. Feedback loops are the structures of our lives, and the term in Sanskrit is sanskara, which means together making. Together making. So I and you, we have a relationship, and in that process of relating, we make each other. We create each other in that process. We both come to subtle subconscious agreements about who the other person is and will be. And when that starts to break apart, because it does, because everything does, two things happen. One, we lose the person we thought we had, and second, we lose the person they thought we were. And it can feel so relieving to lose the person they thought we were that it can be worth losing the person we thought we had. The thing to see, though, is that all of it was delusion. The whole thing. And we were fully participatory in the creation of ourselves, in the same way that they were fully participatory in the creation of themselves, of this other person who was produced. These two other people who were trying to create a relationship. They both needed to slightly shift who they were so that the relationship could be a surviving, a flourishing entity of itself. And it did for a while until it didn't, for whatever reason. And one way to look at this is, well, that's too bad. It's too bad that we have all this delusion. And that's a valid way to look at it. There's nothing invalid about that. It's reasonable to consider it's too bad that we have these relationships based on delusion. It's too bad that we pretend to be this and they pretend to be that. And that then the love we have for each other is wrapped up in a kind of act. We can say that that's too bad, and it's too bad. Okay, fine. It's too bad. And it's true, it's relieving to get ourselves back again. You know, even though it's sad to lose this person. That's all true. But I'd like to ask you again to take a further step with me into this mysterious unknown called relationships. The further step is, what if it's not bad? What if this delusion isn't bad? That would be weird, wouldn't it? How would that work? What would it be like if it weren't bad? To be deluded about who someone else is. To be deluded about who we are. How would that not be bad? Well,
good news.
Yeah, good news.
It works.
First of all, it works. This is good. Thank you for bringing that up because I wasn't going to go there. The first thing is it works. The first thing is good comes of it. Yes? It's true. And there are achievements, there are accomplishments that we can manifest that we couldn't do on our own. And it can be worthwhile to create a relationship out of ourselves. I have a lot to say about that. But I only have a few more minutes. I have a lot to say about that. There's a lot. No, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to finish the direction I was going to finish, but there'll be another talk in this series. Because The point is, in 10 seconds, the point is, oftentimes a relationship is crucial to achieving our vow, our purpose. And in order to achieve it, we transform in order to engage. And that's good. That's compassion. Is that about 10 seconds? Something like that? 15? Well, sorry. The direction I was going to go, though, was this person who we really are, who we return to, who we refind, we reclaim. I heard someone say at one point when they were ending a relationship, I need to reclaim this part of my life. Yes? That is an even deeper delusion. That me, who I really am, who I can now be, I'm now free to be me, that person is a much worse prison, a much deeper delusion than the obviously fake one who you are when you're around that person. You know you're fake, at least, when you're around that person. That's much safer than when you think you're real on your own. Because that person who you think you are isn't a real thing. It's also a created thing that was produced out of what? Other relationships that you just haven't dealt with yet. That person, that real me, is just a combination of billions of years of relationships. That's it. There isn't a substantial me in there. It's just those are the stronger patterns of delusion. And so to engage with a person that way, to be willing to transform, is to be Guanyin, is to be Avalokiteshvara, to transform and shift playfully, lovingly, constantly. And we can experience that in ourselves. We can know that we're doing that. And if we can do that, then we can look at the other person and realize they may be doing the same thing. They may also be this incomprehensible, vast life energy that has not stopped moving from body to body for billions of years now. This one line of vitality, continuing on, and right now moving through this body. Here it is. Changing forms, changing views, changing personalities, changing positions, again and again, but always in relationship. Always in relationship. That's what we're doing, and that's what this other person is doing. Somehow a formless life energy brings their body to life, and they say things and they think things, and we interact with them, and all of it is a playful manifestation of compassion. This is freedom from. Being willing to fully engage in these forms is proof of our freedom from those forms. Because we can transform and transform. So the sense of I have a real me who I am going to be independent of everybody, that's a far more dangerous, self-centered, and delusional perspective than let's get together and make this work. Whatever the this may be, even if the this is, ending the relationship. We're still going to do this in a way that isn't stuck in ourselves. So to me, to look at things in terms of the God-centered nature, the self-centered nature, to be constantly remembering that each person we interact with may be manifesting that God-centered nature in a way that we don't understand, which is exactly why they're manifesting the God-centered, that nature in that way. The whole reason that they have to do it in a way we don't understand is that we don't understand. The whole point is that we don't understand. That's why they have to do it that way. If we understood, they wouldn't. They'd do it in some other way that we don't understand so that we can learn. If we start to have that perspective, then the rhythm, the freedom in our relationships is greater, even while the intimacy, the affirmation is deeper. So perhaps I got that across a little bit. I didn't know how I was going to do it. I don't know if I did it, but it's enough for this week. And we'll have a chance to explore it more as this series continues. So now we'll explore some of this right within ourselves. Take a moment to settle into your body, attending to your posture and your breath. body and breath. Pay attention to your body and breath in order to settle into this period of practice. In terms of preparing for the rest of this period, the most important thing is to work on concentrating. It doesn't matter very much how concentrated you are, and it doesn't matter at all how concentrated you think you are. What matters is, are you trying to concentrate? It's the effort that matters for this particular exercise. So simply make an effort to concentrate, and then whatever happens, happens. That effort is itself preparing you for the rest of the exercise. For a few more minutes, strive to focus on your body, in particular your breath. Very good. And now we'll change the technique considerably. Now, allow yourself to think about yourself. It's often taken to be the very opposite of meditation. Usually in meditation we say, try to focus on your breath, for example. Now you're allowing yourself to think, and about what? About yourself. So take some time. There's no other technique right now. Take some time to allow yourself to think about yourself. If you don't want to, you don't have to. But if you want to, do it. Allow yourself to think whatever you'd like about yourself. Who are you? What do you do? What do you like? What sort of a person are you? Are you better or worse than who you used to be, or someone else? All of that. Just dive right into it if you'd like. Explore it. In a minute, I'm going to ring the bell. And then we'll have 3 minutes or so to move around. Can stretch, get some water, whatever you'd like. During that time, whether you get up and move around or not, continue the technique. The technique is very simple right now. If you'd like, think about yourself. And continue with that technique for a few more minutes. And now, as you think about yourself, whenever a thought about yourself arises, consider that to be a story. That's a story that you're telling about someone. It's an interesting story that you're telling. And just to make things even more interesting, tell a different story. And notice that when you tell a different story about that same person, that person is not the same person. So when you notice yourself thinking about yourself, consider that to be a story that you're telling. And try, just for fun, telling a different story about that person. And allow that different story to create a different person. And once you tire of that, then you can stop and just settle again, allowing yourself to think about yourself. And when, if another thought comes up about yourself, listen to that as a story you're telling about someone. And tell a different story. Different story about that same person that makes a different person. We're just playing with this, so feel free to tell any story you'd like. We're just playing around. The point isn't to find a new and better story that you get stuck in. The point isn't to force yourself into a new box. The point is to notice that how we tell these stories is changeable. That there's freedom in this. And so be playful about it. Don't take it too seriously. Because the it in this case is a story about someone, about ourselves, and if we take it too seriously, then we're taking ourselves a bit too seriously. So just play with it. A story about yourself, whatever it is, tell it differently. Just for fun. You're free to return to the old story if you'd like once the session is over. You know that you're able to tell that story, so don't worry, you won't lose that ability. You'll just be free to enter or leave that track. Be playful about it. You can tell any story you want. It doesn't even have to be realistic. We're just playing with this in order to notice that these are stories that we're telling. Notice that there is freedom in this. Very good. And once again, for a time, return to your body, your breath, and experience without story. Not telling a story about anything, just attending to body at this moment, to this breath, focusing on that, perhaps effortfully. If we start thinking about ourselves or telling stories, that's our opportunity to return, to focus on body and breath. Very good. And the last several minutes of this session, return to thinking, to storytelling. But this time, pay attention to those thoughts that are about someone else. Thoughts that arise that are about someone with whom you have a relationship, for example. And notice again that there's a story in that thought. There's a story about that person. That thought carries and conveys a story. And try telling a different story. It doesn't have to be one that you believe, of course. What you are achieving by telling a different story isn't that you'll now believe that the new story is true. It's that perhaps you'll doubt that the old story is true. You'll notice that they're both stories. Fabricated narratives. And that's enough for this exercise. If you get stuck in a certain story, then the easiest thing to do is to simply reverse it. Simply practice telling the opposite story. That's all. Again, you don't have to believe it. It's not about that. On the contrary, it's about noticing that neither story is entirely believable.
I actually noticed it was hard to do the exercise of thinking about myself, because as soon as it became something I was doing consciously, it just stopped. And then as soon as I forgot about it, I noticed that I started thinking about myself again, and then as soon as I started doing it consciously, it stopped. So it was like whenever there was some intention and effort involved, thinking about myself became like, how do I even do that? It was like, it felt really forced, trying to come up with things to think about.
Yeah. That is a normal experience, and that you bring it up is in itself significant. Thinking about ourselves is shrouded in ignorance. Once we know we're doing it, it's harder to do it. The more clearly we're thinking about ourselves, the more trouble we have thinking about ourselves. So that's interesting that you would give that report at all. That in itself is interesting. I've heard it said, and I like to repeat it, that secrets have power. Secrets have power. Just that something's a secret gives it power. If you're in a family and someone is doing something that no one can talk about, that something has a lot of power. And if you're in a person who's doing something that no one can talk about, that something has a lot of power, and that's yourself. That sense, that person who you think you are when you don't know you think that. That's the person with the power. Once you become conscious of that, once that's consciously delineated, named, clarified, its power over us immediately weakens. Just the same as the moment you get to the point when you can talk to someone about that thing has lost its most significant kind of power. It still has a kind of power. It's not that it's gone, of course, but it's a different kind of power. So just the fact that you bring it up is worth looking at closely. Of course, it isn't only true of ourselves. It's true of other people as well. The stories that we tell about them that we don't know we're telling are the ones with the power. The ones underneath the surface. Once we realize that we're telling that story about them, just that causes it to start its process of disintegration. So the exercise is useful just in that. You understand? Just in seeing that. Just in noticing that when we try to tell stories about ourselves or others, those stories don't have a lot of power. To use that to notice again and again the stories that we're not trying to tell but we tell anyway is the salient aspect of the exercise. Does that make sense? So all that said, I would like to return you to the instructions, just for the sake of it. Do you remember the instructions of the exercise?
To think about ourselves.
Is that true? Was that the instruction? Because I repeated it. How many times did I repeat it, do you think?
If you like. Start if you'd like.
If you'd like. Allow yourself to think about yourself. Yes? I repeated in a number of different words, a number of different times. Right? I didn't say try to think about yourself. Did I? Anyone hear me say that? We have it recorded. We can check. But I don't recall saying that. I recall saying, I tried to say, allow yourself to think about yourself. If you'd like, think about yourself. Right? If you find yourself thinking about yourself, then what? Then intentionally tell a different story. Yes? So the thing to do is that when you weren't trying to think about yourself and thoughts emerged anyway, at that moment, flip it.
Okay.
Yes? That's the way the exercise was structured in order to deal with this issue. But perhaps it's good that I didn't say it 10 times. I only said it 5 times. Because if I said it 10 times, you might have done it, and then you wouldn't have noticed this point. The point is actually, the point that you bring up is actually the point of the exercise. As I said, it isn't that you're trying to believe the new story. It's that you're noticing that this story isn't entirely believable, but wait, the other one isn't either. Right? And then you gain a freedom in it. And that freedom is the point of the exercise. As you do it more and more, you'll get better and better at telling these stories. And then you win both ways. You win in both directions if you do the exercise in this way. What are the 2 directions? On the one hand, you have increased freedom, so the stories don't imprison you as much. And you're telling a better story. It's a nicer prison. You understand? And what happens then is that the stories we tell about ourselves and others, well, this is a metaphor that I like to use a lot. This is a very helpful metaphor. I think I came up with it, but it seems too good. So I doubt I came up with it. I just don't remember where I heard it first. I don't. So the metaphor is that our personalities, our egos, the stories we tell about ourselves and others should be like a house, not a prison. So if we think about in society, there are 2 groups who we might think of as being particularly unfortunate. People who are homeless and people who are imprisoned. Right? So why? Why are they unfortunate whereas people with houses aren't? The reason is simple. The reason is that in neither case are you free to do the other. So if you're in prison, you're not free to leave. If you're homeless, you're not free to enter. In the same way, we should be free if we really believe in these stories. And as I say, they gain their power because of their secrecy, because we're telling them without noticing we're telling them about ourselves or others. If that's happening, then we're in prison. You can't leave it. You understand? You can't get away. You can't stop telling that story. It's just happening. It's as if it's happening to you. And in that way, it's imbued, it's reified in a certain way. It's infused, enlivened by an assumption of its inherent reality. Yes? The moment we know we're telling the story, we know that it's fabricated. And then it loses its power. But if it seems to be happening on its own of itself, then it seems self-existent, which gives it a kind of authority. Right? So in noticing that you're telling it on purpose, you're then typically able to stop telling it, or at least know you could stop telling it. So that's being free to leave. But if you have no ability to direct your life, if you have no ability to have a sense of self, if you have no ability to develop a healthy ego, if you have no ability to form healthy attachments, if you have no ability to understand your life according to certain views and dreams and aspirations, yes, then that means you're not free to enter a sense of personality. You're not free to tell a useful story. The same way as in the other case, you're not free to leave a story that isn't so useful anymore. Okay? So the exercise is allowing you to come and go freely. It's not saying that telling stories is bad or that telling stories is good. Does that make sense? And that's why the instructions of the exercise are given in the way they are. You are allowed to think about yourself. Go ahead. But when you do, at that moment, try telling it in a different way and see what happens when you do that. Not that you have to believe in that new way, just try it so that you notice that it's an intentional, and it's a sanskara, it's an act of creation. Does all that make sense? Yeah.
I really struggle
Yeah.
with this idea that
Yeah.
if you notice a story you're telling about yourself or about others, because you do the same thing, tell the opposite story, notice it's different. And
Oh, right. Did everyone hear that?
No.
You want to say it louder or should I?
if you notice a story about yourself or about another person, and you tell a different story about yourself or about another person, do you notice that different story is another person?
Did you get that? Remember I said that? I'm just going to say it a little louder. So, and correct me if I'm misstating your restatement of me. So he's quoting me. I'm going to quote him quoting me, and we'll hope we're still there. If you tell a different story about someone, then they're a different person. All right? That could be, the they here could be you. So if you tell a different story about yourself, you're different. If you tell a different story about someone else, they're different. It's a strong statement, and we don't know what's about to happen now. A lot of tension in the room. Yes. Go ahead.
So, all right. So, so I was experimenting with telling patently ridiculous stories.
Yeah.
Some
Yeah, right.
myself, I did some of that.
Yeah.
Patently ridiculous.
Right.
Like I'm on Mars
Right.
or I don't pay my ex-wife alimony.
Right.
That seems like a ridiculous statement.
Yeah, right.
Different person than who I am.
Right.
Okay.
And isn't that
I
true?
can tell stories about this other person,
Right.
my ex-wife.
Yep.
Or,
Yeah. Yeah.
and they're patently ridiculous alternate stories. And then this is what I'm struggling with.
Yeah.
You point out that to notice the lack of believability in the patently ridiculous story.
Yeah.
And how that seems to show some lack of believability
Yeah.
in what I would say to be the story I think is normally true.
Yeah.
I'm having a hard time with that because then
Yeah.
I analyze it. Clearly, I pay my ex-wife alimony.
Right.
So where's the lack of believability in that?
Yeah. Should I tell you, or do you want to? Yeah.
Yes, please.
Yeah. The lack of believability in it isn't that it's untrue in some way. It's that the story is what makes it true. It's not inherently true. It's not that you're inherently someone who pays alimony. It's that you've told that story about yourself, you've selected that identity, and in selecting it, you have become it.
Okay, I hear that and I accept that answer. I just want to say that if I actually internalize what I hear you saying, that
Dangerous?
what?
It's dangerous?
Poof.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Poof.
So
Yeah. This is why. This is a good point. This is a good point. So, this is a very good point. And it actually brings up a very serious issue. So I'm gonna take what you're saying and actually, what do they say? I'll see your poof and raise you a poof. Is that what they say?
I'm gonna fold.
Yeah, right. We will fold. That's. I'm saying this is how you don't fold. I'm about to bring us to that level. Okay? Because sometimes you don't want to fold. Right? There are times when you shouldn't fold. Yeah, you want to play. You want to keep playing. And it's dangerous to fold. It can be really dangerous to fold. And And so I want to bring this up for the sake of our liberal Vermont demographic here. The point is that I'm going to make right now is very simple, and it's one I hope we take very seriously. Because if you don't, then it's a problem. I'll just leave it at that. You have to actually take this poof really seriously, because it's really dangerous. The poof is a very dangerous phenomenon. And it's why which may seem strange from someone like me, I am a great supporter of fundamentalist religion. Because fundamentalists rarely go poof. It's true, and it's statistically you can demonstrate this statistically. There is a clear correlation, and I think that there's clear causation between, in a given state, the amount of fundamentalism, the amount of fundamentalist religion, and the amount of alcoholism. Okay? The more fundamentalism, the less alcoholism. It's a fact. And I think there's causation there. I think that the fundamentalism prevents alcoholism. In our state here in Vermont, we have very little fundamentalism, and we have a lot of alcoholism. And alcoholism is terrible. It's a terrible disease that wrecks lives, that wrecks families. And if we need to tell a very strong story that you're not allowed to doubt in order to prevent that, I think that there's an argument to be made for that. Does all this make sense? So what is fundamentalism? Fundamentalism means you tell a clear story. It doesn't have to be believable. You just have to believe it. Right? There we are. You can't doubt it. It is the truth. And you're not allowed to doubt it. And when you have a story that's strong like that can't be questioned, that can't be seen as a story, then all kinds of stable structures can form around it. And all kinds of positive stable structures can form around it. Yes, some negative formal structures can form around it too. Yes, I see that. We see that. But there's a real value in that. And if we don't value that, then we're not seeing the whole picture. Because what we're playing with here in an exercise like this, in a group like this, so there's fundamentalism as a spiritual form, right? And then there's mysticism as a spiritual form. Fundamentalism is about taking certain beliefs and believing them. Mysticism is about exploring experience, exploring direct experience. Okay? So if you have a belief-based system, if you have a doctrinal system, then that in an extreme form is fundamentalism. If you have an experience-based form, then extreme case is mysticism. And this is a mystical group, which just means that if the evidence of our direct experience doesn't support a certain doctrine, then the direct experience is prioritized. Right? So that's what we do here. And it's very important that this kind of crew understands the danger in that. Because you're breaking up all kinds of important structures that we depend on, and it's easy for things to just go poof. And that can be very dangerous. A whole life can fall apart. Relationships can fall apart. Because we feel like, well, they're not real anyway. I mean, there's no one there anyway. We just create all this anyway. And we find ourselves suddenly in a kind of nihilism, which is very dangerous. And if you ask me, nihilism is more dangerous than fundamentalism. If you ask me. I actually don't think that fundamentalism is all that dangerous. Sorry, American people who are so excited about Islam. So it's not that bad compared to a lot of stuff happening nowadays, which is driven, I think, by nihilism, by the modern nihilistic, materialistic view of things, which is a far more popular and dangerous religion than fundamentalist Islam. So what do we do about that? Is that where this is going?
It seemed like you were giving me an exercise in practicing knowledge.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. It feels that way, doesn't it?
It does.
Exactly. And again, that's very dangerous. Because once these stable structures are seen as needing to be constantly upheld, that they're not inherently stable after all, then what do we believe in? What do we use as a compass? Right? Isn't that where this is all going?
If I can't even be sure that I pay my ex-wife alimony,
Right.
can I be sure?
Exactly. Right. Exactly. This is an excellent question. When we, so it's good that you bring this up, because let's face it, it's there isn't another way, unfortunately, than this kind of conversation happening for me to give the disclosure. You know what I mean? The full disclosure is, so folks, good news and bad news. Good news is, if you really do this practice, it'll wreck your life. That's also the bad news. But it's the good news. It's good news that that your life as you know it will fall apart. Because there are parts of your life as you know it that ought to fall apart. The thing is, it's really hard to give that full disclosure beforehand. Not because people will hear it and not practice. Actually, not at all. That isn't what I'm worried about at all, honestly. It's just that people won't hear it. I say it and people don't hear it. They don't hear it. It's not that they think, oh, then I don't want to do it. They just don't hear it. They don't understand what I mean until someone like you says something like what you just said. And then there's a risk, oh, this is actually real. Oh, I see. And that moment is a great gift to any group. So thank you for giving that gift to the group. So now we're in it, right? We've entered now. It's the real thing now. And so we have to give real answers because this is a real question. If you're going to take a step, which you may have taken, again, without knowing it. I didn't say if you choose to take a step. That doesn't actually matter much. If you take the step, whether you choose to or not, it doesn't actually matter. But once you've taken a step and realized that things that we thought were and must be inherently stable are not and never were, you can't really turn back. You have to continue on to the point of discovering that there is a kind of compassion that is not a story. There's a kind of love that we didn't make up. There's such a thing as relationships with each other that are, for no reason that we created on purpose, already inherently precious. There's a great love which is prior to everything we believe, everything we think, everything we could become, everything that we could destroy. There is something there that you can only obstruct, but you can't create. And once you start going down the path of things breaking up, you have to keep going until that starts to open up and starts to be the guide. And so I'm going to tell you, we still have a couple more minutes. I'm going to tell you a poem that I wrote. And as far as I can tell, this poem is my greatest achievement in my life. And it's about what you're saying. It's about the question you're asking. It's 4 simple lines. It goes like this. Whenever my children came to see me, I reminded myself to say, I love you. But now that I know it's the truth, the words come out fresh and clear each time. Coming to the point when we can see if it's the truth requires us becoming free of the act of acting like it's the truth.